Well, maybe you heard that song on the radio. It's called You Found Me. It was written by Isaac Slade of any rock star experts here? The Fray. And as you heard in the interview, he wrote it during a pretty tough time in his life. And in the song, he imagines himself running into God at the corner of First and Amistad and wonders what he'd say to God, whom he envisions slouching at the corner smoking his last cigarette. The conversation turns into a complaint. And Slade doesn't hold back. Where were you when everything was falling apart? All my days were spent by the telephone that never rang. All I needed was a call that never came. And in the singer's frustration, the chorus turns a bit sarcastic as he thanks God for finding him just a little late. Lost and insecure, you found me, lying on the floor surrounded. Why'd you have to wait? Where were you? Just a little late, but you did find me. Now, Isaac Slade has given us a modern-day lament that many of us had probably been singing in the car without realizing that we were lamenting with Slade and complaining to God in the process. Not that we would have objected. Which of us haven't felt like complaining to God over the course of our imperfect little lives? Which of us hasn't wondered why God seemed absent when we needed him the most? Who of us haven't felt like writing a psalm of complaint to God if only we had the words? Thankfully, we have songwriters like Isaac Slade who give us words and courage to complain to God, and hopefully you know this, but Slade is not the first to voice his frustrations to God. Some of the most honest, authentic, sarcastic complaints to God are found in the Bible. They come to us as song lyrics in the book of Psalms, which was ancient Israel's songbook for worship. We have long lost the music, but we still have the lyrics. Some of these lyrics are happy and joyful and full of gratitude, but some of them are sad and frustrated and desperate. They are laments. And they're invitations given to us by God himself to complain and whine to him as honestly as we need to. God knows that an authentic interpersonal relationship with him demands nothing less than the freedom to complain. And we're studying these Psalms of Lament in our series here at Rooftop called Sad Psalms Say So Much. And this morning I want to read and study with you one of the saddest. It's Psalm 88. If anybody came here to church this morning looking for a happy pill to pop, this is not your morning. Psalm 88 is not a happy pill, but we have a lot to learn from the psalm about how to deal with life and God when you find yourself at the corner of First and Amistad. So if you have your Bibles, go ahead and open them up to Psalm 88. I'll be reading from the NIV 1984 version. Psalm 88, a psalm of the sons of Korah for the director of music, a maskil of Heman the Ezrahite. O Lord, the God who saves me, day and night I cry out before you. May my prayer come before you. Turn your ear to my cry. For my soul is full of trouble. My life draws near the grave. I am counted among those who go down to the pit. I am like a man without strength. I am set apart with the dead, like the slain who lie in the grave, whom you remember no more, who are cut off from your care. You have put me in the lowest pit, in the darkest depths. Your wrath lies heavily upon me. You have overwhelmed me with all your waves. You have taken from me my closest friends and have made me repulsive to them. I am confined and cannot escape. My eyes are dim with grief. I call to you, O Lord, every day. I spread out my hands to you. Do you show your wonders to the dead? Do those who are dead rise up and praise you? Is your love declared in the grave, your faithfulness in destruction? Are your wonders known in the place of darkness, or your righteous deeds in the land of oblivion? But I cry to you for help, O Lord. In the morning my prayer comes before you. Why, O Lord, do you reject me and hide your face from me? From my youth I have been afflicted and close to death. I've suffered your terrors and am in despair. Your wrath has swept over me. Your terrors have destroyed me. All day long they surround me like a flood. They have completely engulfed me. You have taken my companions and loved ones from me. The darkness is my closest friend. The end. Now, the title of this Psalm, 88, says it was written by a man named Heman the Ezrahite of the sons of Korah. I like to think of that as their band name, the sons of Korah, with frontman Heman the Ezrahite. unfunny jokes aside, this is a sad song. In fact, it is widely regarded as the saddest psalm in all the book of Psalms. One commentator says this: Psalm 88 is the gloomiest psalm found in the Scriptures. Another says, this is the darkest, saddest psalm in all the Psalter. It is one wail of sorrow from beginning to end. Now, there are lots of reasons why it's probably regarded, why it has such a sad reputation, including the dark imagery. But the reason it's probably regarded as the saddest psalm in the Bible is because of this terribly sad ending. I mean, almost every psalm in the Bible ends slightly happy, no matter how low it gets in the middle. Even this one has a happy moment. It kind of starts off slightly hopeful. He starts off with a rather hopeful, expectant cry. O Lord, the God who saves me, day and night I cry out before you. That's verse 1, but it goes downhill from there. Verse 3 reads, for my soul is full of trouble, my life draws near the grave. Verse 4, I am counted among those who go down to the pit. And we keep descending to the pit. In verse 8, you have taken me from me, my closest friends, and have made me repulsive to them. Here's verse 14. Why, O Lord, do you reject me, hide your face from me? Finally, he concludes with this agonizing line at the end. You have taken my companions and loved ones from me. The darkness is my closest friend. And the darkness isn't much of a friend. That's his point. So it'd be one thing if that line was in the middle of the psalm with a rousing conclusion at the end about how God will never leave us, even though it feels like the darkness is our closest friend. But that's not how the song is written. That's the ending. The darkness is my closest friend. If we don't like sad songs, we really don't like sad endings. That's not where we listen to music or go to movies to have to watch sad endings. I remember when I was a boy, for example, my parents took me to go see a movie with my brothers and sister. We went to go see My Girl, this old childhood nostalgia film with Macaulay Culkin and somebody else, I don't know. Up to this point in my life, I had watched Disney movies with lots of singing, exciting sports movies with dramatic finishes, westerns with good guys winning, and musicals with big tap dancing finales. That was my cinematic experience up to this point. But at the end of My Girl, I don't want to spoil anything for you, but it's been out like for 25 years, so... At the end of My Girl, Macaulay Culkin's character loses his glasses, steps in a hornet's nest, dies from an allergic reaction to all the bee stings, and his closest friend copes by writing a sad poem about how she'll never see him again. The end. I still remember sitting in the movie theater waiting for the next scene. This was not my experience in movie theaters. Sad poem. The end. Credits roll. What about the home run? When does the night show up? What about the final tap dance number? I don't get it. Even today, I don't like movies with sad endings. Who would pay for this? American Beauty, Saving Private Ryan, The Perfect Storm, The Green Mile, Gone Baby Gone, Dead Man Walking, Pay It Forward, Steel Magnolias, Bridge to Terabithia, The Empire Strikes Back. Remember the ending of The Empire Strikes Back? Han Solo's frozen, Luke Skywalker has his hand cut off. Credits. That's the end of The Empire Strikes Back. This isn't why we go to the movies. It's not why we read the Bible. Why do they do this to us? Well, they do this to us because life doesn't always end with a bow on it. Songs don't always end on a major chord. People don't always get healed. Marriages don't always make it. Cancer doesn't always go away. Churches don't always grow and thrive. Jedis don't always win the battle. In fact, I read a conversation this week between two Christian scholars who wondered why so little great literature has been written by Christian authors. I mean, most of the great literature has been written by non-Christians. And one of the theories is that, as one of these scholars said, one of the theories was Christians aren't generally true to life. All the great novelists are true to life. And Christians struggle to be true to life. Many Christians struggle to really accept tragedy and sorrow and depression and loneliness. Psalm 88 forces us to be true to life. It forces us to be honest. Sometimes there isn't a happy ending, and while you want things to get better, they don't. That's just life. Let's look a bit deeper at the psalm, though. If the purpose of Psalm 88 is to help us stay true to life, to help us come to terms with how frustrating and disappointing life and faith can be, let's make sure we've really studied this poem and understood what's happening. And here's how I want to do this. As I read Psalm 88, 3 interpretive questions come up. These are interpretive questions that you've got to be able to answer in order to understand what's really going on in the psalm. I mean, without answering these basic fundamental questions, it's hard to know what this means. So there's 3 questions about Psalm 88 that I want to take a look at with you this morning, starting with this first one. What's this guy's problem exactly? What's his deal? This is a sad psalm, but it's not clear what the source of his sorrow is. What's going on? Some commentators say it's a deathbed plea made by someone not quite ready to die. His reference to going down to the pit. He's not a digger. He's afraid of death. He complains that he has been afflicted and close to death. So maybe he's on his deathbed. Or maybe he's depressed. Some commentators think that even if Heman the psalmist was writing about the imminence of his death, the condition described in the psalm isn't really physical as much as emotional. They think this is a song written by a very depressed man, whether or not he's dying. As he writes in verse 3, he says, "My soul is full of trouble." And people who have experienced any form of depression will recognize a lot of the symptoms in this psalm. I'm like a man without strength. Depression can just sap you of energy, leaving you with little motivation to do anything. Or in verse 8, where he laments, "I am confined and cannot escape. My eyes are dim with grief." Depressed people are overwhelmed with sadness, often of some unidentified sort. You just feel unbelievably sad, and you have no idea why. So maybe he's dying, maybe he's depressed, maybe both. Either way, we can all relate to this. Life isn't life unless you die. Life isn't life unless you get depressed. Maybe not clinically so, but how can you not get sad beyond just the rainy day blues, living in the world that we live in? How is that possible? With all the world's pain and the sin that won't go away, how can anybody read Psalm 88 and not go, yep? Some of the world's greatest saints have also been some of the saddest. St. John of the Cross, a 16th century Spanish priest, wrote a poem several centuries ago describing the dark night of the soul. And he describes the life of faith, the life of God's people, as one big, long journey through a very dark night. Mother Teresa even wrote quietly of her own doubts and sorrows, wondering why she felt so alone and abandoned by God. In a letter to a friend, she wrote, "Jesus has a very special love for you. As for me, the silence and the emptiness is so great that I look and do not see, listen and do not hear." Interestingly, Mother Teresa was kind of embarrassed by these confessions and letters, and she asked that they be burned after she died. But the Pope decided to release them instead, thinking they would bring great comfort to people who might struggle similarly. And I'm not just talking about earthly saints either. Even Jesus himself was described as a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. So my point in all this is that sorrow and sadness and maybe even depression are normal to the human condition and even to the life of faith. How can we not look at our lives and weep from who we are and what we've become? I mean, I feel this psalm. I feel these verses. In verse 7 he writes, "Your wrath lies heavily upon me. You have overwhelmed me with all your waves." There's a lot of flood imagery in this psalm. Verse 17 says, "All day long your terrors surround me like a flood. You have completely engulfed me." I'm not clinically depressed. I'm not dying, I don't think. I just feel surrounded by floodwaters. Surrounded by people with problems too big for me to handle. Surrounded by responsibilities that are too numerous to manage. Surrounded by questions that are too complicated to answer. Surrounded by bills. Surrounded by kids' sports schedules. You finish one, another one starts. Surrounded by fix-it projects at home. Do this, do that, do that. Surrounded by my own mistakes. Surrounded by meetings. Surrounded by others' expectations. Just surrounded. Without escape. The waters keep rising. Anybody else feel surrounded? Anybody feel depressed? Anybody feel close to death? Anybody feel lost and lonely in the dark? Whatever exactly the psalmist is dealing with, Psalm 88 gives us permission to feel whatever we do. We're not the first to. It's part of faith. So that's the first interpretive question. What's this guy's problem? The second interpretive question is this. Where is God in all this? God, for his part, seems all over the place. Seems to be there. He even acknowledges this. It says, "O Lord, the God who saves me, day and night I cry out before you." I know you're there. But he also seems absent. "Why, O Lord, do you reject me and hide your face from me?" And not only does he seem absent or there, he seems present, but he seems present in a downright oppressive sort of way. Psalm 88 contains a list of accusations against God that should make us blush. Here's what he writes. And you have to read these verses with your finger going like this. "You have put me in the lowest pit. Your wrath lies heavily upon me. You have overwhelmed me with all your waves. You have taken from me my closest friends. You have made me repulsive to them." This is bold. I mean, in Psalm 38, which we looked at last week, the author places the blame for his situation squarely on who? Himself. In Psalm 88, though, there is no question here. There is no admission of guilt. There are only accusations. Whose fault is it that Heman is in the pickle that he is? God's, and God's alone. So anyway, this is confusing. God seems all over the place in this psalm. He seems at hand, he seems at large, and he seems at fault. He's at hand, and that he's present as Savior to hear his prayer and respond. He's at large, and that he's nowhere to be found even when we need him the most. And he's at fault, and that he's the one who brought this calamity on us. Which is it? Is God at hand, at large, or at fault? Or all three? Well, what I think the psalmist is realizing here is that God is a person. God isn't an equation. God isn't a set of expectations, a set of benefits. He's not a formula or an agreement. He's not a contract. He's a person. People are complicated. Relationships are complicated. Relationships with ordinary people are complicated. Imagine what a relationship is with the divine person. If you ask my kids to describe my relationship with them, they'd say something very similar to this, that I am at hand, at large, and at fault, all at the same time. Sometimes my dad is right there by my side. I love him for it. Sometimes when I need him, he doesn't seem to be there. I feel like I'm on my own. Sometimes he's with me, and I wish he would leave me alone. None of that means I don't exist. It just means I'm in relationship with them. It's all part of having a personal relationship with God. That's what we signed up for, right? A personal relationship with God. You heard some preacher invite you to have a personal relationship with God. You mean I can know God personally? Absolutely. You can know God personally. But maybe the terms of that personal relationship weren't very well spelled out at that invitation. Because it's part of having a personal relationship with God. Maybe it wasn't really explaining what personal relationship means. Yes, God will be with you. Sometimes he will be more present to you than the nose on your face. Sometimes you will hear him more clearly than jet engines over your head. But sometimes he will seem more distant than Pluto. Sometimes you will sound more quiet than a rock. As Paul writes to the Romans, how unsearchable are God's judgments, and his paths beyond tracing out. Who has known the mind of the Lord? This doesn't mean God doesn't exist or that he's schizophrenic. It just means that knowing God is as unpredictable and difficult and mysterious as knowing any other person. He's at large, at fault, at hand, all at the same time, because he's the divine person. And people are complicated. Relationships are complicated. They are wonderful, but they are complicated. That's the second interpretive question. Where is God in all this? The third, the final one is this. Is there hope beyond the grave? One of the difficulties of this psalm is that the writer is terrified, and I mean terrified of death. He writes in verse 3, he says, "My soul is full of trouble, my life draws near the grave." And his fear turns sarcastic in verse 10. "Do you show your wonders to the dead? Do those who are dead rise up and praise you?" These are rhetorical questions. What's the answer? No. "Are your wonders known in the place of darkness, or your righteous deeds in the land of oblivion?" In other words, save me now, because once I'm dead, what hope is there? This was Heman's understanding of life after death. In the Old Testament, the afterlife was called Sheol. And it wasn't altogether a happy place. It was the place of shadow, where everybody went, the land of oblivion, where nobody remembers God and God probably won't remember you. Heman didn't have a New Testament concept of heaven and was afraid of drifting forever into the land of oblivion, where everybody goes when they die. Basically, the psalmist is up against a life or death deadline and needs God to answer sooner, not later. It does him no good if God comes through just a little late, as the phrase sings. We know the feeling of having deadlines. We've had deadlines in which we need God to act, and quickly, and if he's too late, well then forget it, it doesn't matter. We've had loved ones suffer on their deathbed and needed God to answer by the deadline. What good does it do if God walks into the hospital room after the family has decided to pull the plug? How many of us have had bills due and prayed desperately for God's provision? God, I need help with my mortgage. I need it today. The bank is coming to repossess tomorrow. I don't need help tomorrow or the next day. I need help today. I cannot provide for my family if I don't have a place to live. I cannot praise you from the grave. Or maybe you've got a marriage deadline. God, my marriage is on the ropes. My spouse is filing for divorce soon. I need your help now. I cannot be a good husband or wife if my spouse says we're done. I need your help. I need it now. I don't need it later. I cannot praise you from the grave. I know this prayer too. The elders here at Rooftop are negotiating a contract with someone to buy our building. It's a little unorthodox to sell your building without having a building to buy, which we don't. But we felt like we should, and we had a lot of interested buyers, so we're in the process of finalizing this deal. But that'll mean we'll have a deadline, a closing date. That's what it's called in the real estate market, early next year or so. And we'll need God to answer before the deadline. Not that this is a life or death situation, but who praises him from the grave? So we all have deadlines, and we need God to answer before the deadline, not after the deadline. Who praises him from the grave? But at this point, we have to remember something pretty important. We have to remember that the psalmist did not know the whole story. He thought death was the end. We know it's not. Jesus came, lived, died, rose again, crashing through the deadline. He came and enlarged the Jews' understanding of life after death. In fact, Psalm 88 is prophetic in an accidental, unexpected, almost hysterical sort of way. That rhetorical question that I asked you earlier, verse 10, what does the author ask? Do you show your wonders to the dead? Do those who are dead rise up and praise you? Imagine God's thought at hearing that prayer. Imagine the restraint it took from him. Do the dead rise up and praise you? Don't you think he just wanted to blurt it out? Yes, they do. You just wait. I mean, the psalmist meant it as a rhetorical question. No, it's obvious, no. God had the answer, just tucked away. We're so obsessed with our deadlines. I don't think God is. God, you have to save me today, not tomorrow. Why does he? If tomorrow's not the deadline. I'm thinking of the story of Lazarus in the Gospel of John, for example. Know the story of Lazarus in the Gospel of John? Jesus' friend Lazarus was sick and dying, but Jesus was a ways away. His sisters, Lazarus' sisters, Mary and Martha, they sent a telegraph to Jesus saying, Lazarus is sick and dying, come soon to heal him, stop. What did Jesus do? Nothing. Kept doing what he was doing. Said, I'll get there when I get there. Didn't hop on a plane, didn't charter a camel, did nothing. Just kept doing what he was doing. Did he not love Lazarus? Of course he did. He knew the deadline wasn't really the deadline. He actually waits 4 whole days before going to see Lazarus. He finally gets there, and what do Mary and Martha say? Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Or as Isaac Slade sings, why'd you have to wait? Where were you? Just a little late. They thought Jesus missed the deadline. He knew the deadline wasn't as important as they thought, so he shows up on the scene and he announces, your brother will rise again. I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live, even though he dies. Whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Martha says yes, and Jesus calls Lazarus from the grave, just a little late, perfectly on time. God is not confined to our deadlines. Heman the Ezrahite will discover this at the final resurrection, if he has not already. God has every intention of hearing our prayers and being there for us, but as the divine person, he will not be told what that looks like or when it needs to happen. He will show up when he does, just a little late, but perfectly on time all the same. In the meantime, though, while we wait for him to show, Psalm 88 gives us permission to weep and wail. Heman, the Ezrahite, invites us to cry and complain. Isaac Slade leads us as we grouse, groan, grumble, and gripe. And maybe in the midst of all the happy songs Christians are singing this morning, that's a song you need to sing. If you met God at the corner of First and Amistad, maybe that's the conversation you'd need to have. If it is, have it. Ask God your questions. Voice your complaints. Raise your voice. Summon up your sarcasm. Do you think he can't take it? Do you think he's not big enough to handle you? He's heard it before. He's not offended by your honesty. He'd be honored to hear your heart. A personal relationship with God requires nothing less. Let's pray.